on here? What do you got on divorce end?
This week has been interesting. Um, I guess what we could talk about is just like people that are trying to DIY their own divorce
Hmm.
and the issues that they run into in trying to get through the court system. I say this week was interesting because we've had several clients come to us who have amicable divorce cases. So they're cooperative and agreement, all that good stuff, but then ended up hiring attorneys, just getting one attorney, like one spouse got an attorney, not because they were uncooperative, but just to handle their paperwork. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. The only difference is they're going to spend, I think the going rate, even for a simple divorce with an attorney, is like about $5,000 retainer.
Oh, okay.
And we're getting cases this week where people have done that. They've, once they're amicable, cooperative, they've hired one attorney to do the paperwork, but the attorney cannot get their case approved by the court. And we're talking really, really simple cases, things that we do every day in just a matter of days. And these cases have been dragged down for months. And half of me has to say, this may be due so they can bill extra time for all the extra work if it's intentional. But these folks, we had 2 clients hire us this week that
Right.
were in this predicament. And once we do a case review and look what they're doing, I don't think it's intentional, because the paperwork, the way the attorneys are filing it, is completely incorrect, which is causing, in this one case, their judgment package. This is where people will get caught up. Is, you can file your petition and do all your paperwork. It's not until you submit your judgment package for review that the court actually reviews any of your paperwork, and that will generally result in a reject if you don't know what you're doing or trying to do it yourself. So these attorneys are having the same problem. They're trying to file these cases as what's called a true default, which means a default without an agreement. And those are the toughest cases to get through the court. So because clients will say, well, how come this attorney can not get our case through, been rejected 5 times, and you say you can guarantee getting it approved? And the whole difference is in how you treat your divorce case. There's no reason to not submit a settlement agreement to court if the parties are cooperative. I think there's a misunderstanding out there amongst people trying to do their own divorce. And I talk about this so much,
Yeah.
the difference between defaults with agreement and without an agreement. True defaults without agreement, that falls back to California law. So when you're trying to divide property, your assets and debts, California law says everything has to be divided equally. You don't get a say because there's technically no agreement being submitted.
Right.
So whereas a default with an agreement, you have a settlement agreement, obviously, the parties sign, and then you can circumvent the law and you can divide up your assets as you wish. It doesn't have to be equal at all. So in both these cases where the parties who hired us had attorneys previously, they were trying to submit the divorce as a default with no agreement, and it was getting flagged, and they're telling them they need to set hearings and trials, all this because the court needs to assess the values when there's no agreement so they can make sure there's an even distribution of assets and debts. So in both these cases, we took them over, did an assessment, and all we had to do is draw out a settlement agreement for them that the parties will sign and notarize, and they'll sail right through the court. So it's this default process that these attorneys have been trying to file for. They probably think it's easier, and I think that even clients doing their own divorce, they'd say, well, I don't want to involve my spouse because we're in agreement, so we're going to do this default. Those are the most challenging cases to get through the court. All we do is turn it into a default with a written agreement, and they get approved usually in a week or so.
I was going to say
that's kind of the news out here now.
Yeah, it sounds like that's the kind of lazy way out for the attorneys, right?
It's more work for them to try and do that. And I think what happens is there's that, they have that attorney-client relationship. So they're not working with both, like we work with both spouses in all cases. And that's what makes the process
They're
more
only
seamless.
On one side of it.
They're only, and if they're going to hire someone, it should be someone who's neutral, who's going to handle the paperwork for both sides versus doing the paperwork for one spouse and not for the other. And that's why they're doing it as this default process, because they're not helping the other party with their paperwork. So it's an interesting how they're doing this, but it's causing them problems to where this is now 3 cases that we've got drafted as a settlement agreement, written agreement. It's not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what's been going on this week. And we don't get a lot of cases from attorneys. So that's why it's noteworthy that these attorneys are unable to get these through and how they're handling them. We talked about this, I think last week's show or the week before, about companies taking on cases, only doing the paperwork for one spouse, but then guaranteeing the paperwork will be approved by the court. And that's impossible if both parties aren't participating.
So these agreements. So if you have a couple that's amicable getting divorced and they have various assets, if they don't do an agreement, California law, they split everything in the middle. They don't care who's uprooted or not. All
Right.
assets must be liquidated, cashed out, and then money's divided.
Exactly. I can give you a
Period.
perfect, yeah, I can give you a perfect example of that. We've had, this is probably 8 years ago. We had a client who said that they, the husband doesn't want anything. I can have all my, assets. She had 401ks and pensions worth quite a bit of money. They had a house and all that. So we, filed their case. Then he decided he wasn't going to participate or cooperate at all. Said he wasn't going to fight it, but he wasn't going to sign anything. So when that happens, we have to refile the case. Now it's going to be a default without an agreement. And if you submit the judgment and say she's going to keep all of her assets like he said she could, but he's not signing an agreement, that will not get approved by the court. They will mandate it to be divided equally. So even though he didn't want anything supposedly because he didn't participate, it was ordered by the court that everything be split 50-50. So that's the challenges and
Wow.
the issues with doing these defaults, and why I won't even take those cases unless there's no assets, no debts, no kids,
Yeah.
short-term marriage. And, and even with spouse support, if you've been married longer than 10 years and you want to terminate spouse support, you can only terminate it by agreement. You can't terminate because California law says the jurisdiction will remain indefinitely. So we have these people that are trying to terminate spousal on a true default with
Mhm.
no agreement, and the court rejects their judgment because it goes against California law. But by agreement, we put in a stipulation that they waive it and terminate it, no problem. So the biggest difference is agreement versus no agreement in getting these cases through.
That's very interesting.
Yeah,
You would think so. So the guy's trying to look good, probably. Oh, I don't want anything. I'm just not going to participate,
right.
and ends up still getting half.
Yep, exactly.
Lovely.
I,
Just
I tell folks that it's better if they contest it than do nothing, because when a spouse does nothing on the other end, it's very challenging to get through court because you're going to have multiple court hearings. Because the court's going to wonder, why is this person not participating? Why are they not involved? Especially if there's kids involved in custody and so
right.
forth. The court doesn't understand that, so they're going to set multiple hearings, especially when people intentionally frustrate the process, which we don't have to deal with that too often because we're dealing with folks who are cooperative.
Mhm.
But where parties will like file a response and then do nothing else, they've made that official appearance with the court, and then they don't do anything else. They just disappear. And the court, because they've appeared, they have to have multiple hearings before they will order the divorce and property division and custody, because that official appearance has been made, and then they no longer show up. So, and that'll take a year and a half to finalize, because you have to get that case into the court system in front of a judge multiple times to finalize those types of cases.
I want to ask you: is there ever does everybody always go to court on every single divorce, or you don't even have to go if everything's amicable paperwork? It's all done that way.
Right. Yeah. Our clients never go to court. If you reach an agreement on all issues, there's no court appearances whatsoever.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's
Oh,
it's a
great. That's
nice
good to know.
nice process.
Yeah.
As nice as divorce can be, right? You
Sure.
talk to your spouse, reach an agreement. We put all the paperwork together. It's basically, it'll never even see a judge, to be honest with you. It's just the judicial assistant at court who approves these, and now all of these with LA County, at least, it's electronically filed. So there's just a clerk who has the authorization by the judge to put their name down
Stamp it.
as
Stamp.
approved.
Stamp. Stamp.
Yeah, because it's more procedural at that point. They're looking at I's dotted, T's crossed. Procedurally, the case was handled properly. Other than that, they could care less of the nature of the agreement, because they know that the parties agreed to it. They've done all their paperwork. They've notarized it, and so that they're just looking for procedural elements for approval.